Hi, class. Um, Welcome back. Today, I decided to make a short lecture video discussing what my expectations are for the prompt for essay 2, your final essay. Um, and what I did was I actually made 2 prompts. One, after I'd written the first one, I realized how dark and sort of maybe even hopeless the prompt was. And I thought, well, some of you might be really interested in looking at the literature from that perspective. So I decided to keep it. But then I also thought that maybe some of you, especially with the current crisis and COVID-19 that's happening, might feel a little bit, might want an escape from that sort of dark reality that we're finding ourselves in right now. So I also went back and I wrote another option where it's a little bit more hopeful, right? So choose again whichever one interests you most. You are not required to do both, right? That's why they're titled option 1 and option 2, okay? So from darkness to depravity, the slow extinguishing of the American dream. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, angel headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night. Allen Ginsberg Howell. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better or for worse as his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on the plot of ground which is given to him to till. The power which resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is, which he can do, nor does he know until he has tried. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Self-Reliance. So in our first essay, we examined the concept of American newness, the boundless optimism. This venture to create a paradigm in America was pursued with eager joy and hope to perhaps unburden ourselves from the chains of Europe, Emerson writes. Enthusiasm is one of the most powerful engines of success. When you do a thing, do it with all your might. Put your whole soul into it, stamp it out with your own personality. Be active, be energetic, be enthusiastic and faithful, and you will accomplish your object. Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. This enthusiasm has long since dwindled. And as you've likely noticed, the second half of this course, that optimism has begun to wilt in the face of systemic racial and cultural adversity. In many of these works, the American ideal, the dream that drove American authors to plant their flags and expand their boundaries, has soured into a cry against the forces that wish to oppress their uniqueness and quash their ideals. If once the world was new, now men and women are trapped in their inescapable cycle of violence and stonewalled by a stagnant culture that only seeks to assimilate and devour. In The Swimmer, we see the grinding march of suburban mediocrity. In Howl, we see the street descendants moan and rage against the American zeitgeist, mediocrity. In Howl, we see, American zeitgeist, the Moloch that devours our youth and replaces it with conformity indeed. Pynchon's entropy equates the American decline with the laws that govern our very universe, how all must slowly be sundered and ripped apart. But even in these dark disconnections is hope, little glimmers of what could be if the shackles of the American consumerism, xenophobia, and tribalism were broken. This essay asks you to trace the disillusion of the American ideal through 3 authors, examining in turn what ideal was lost, how it became lost, and perhaps faint offerings of redemption their writings convey. It will require an examination of what the American ideal meant to these artists, how they would have defined it in its absence, and whether it is lost forever or merely lying dormant, ready to burst anew. Lastly, you should leave room to either chart a path toward a renewal of the American consciousness and community, define this renewal using works and theoretical approaches touched on in this course, or show us the future we may now be fated to inherit. This section may require you to reflect on your own disillusionment of the American dream, or explore how you personally have found hope still emanating from the dying star that was once imagined becoming the shining city upon a hill. So what I'm getting at here is what I want you to do is the beginning of the class, right? We're looking to trace the American newness, right? What adventures toward betterment did America undergo, right? And so with this essay, and for those of you who took my early American literature class, right? What I want you to do is to trace the slow extinction of the American dream, right? And how the authors of that time are sort of creating that essence. How they're being critical of it, and then in a sense, how could we overcome it, or how do they overcome it through their writing? And then it is asking you to be somewhat self-reflective. So for those of you who took my early American literature class, what I asked you to do in your second essay was to define the American dream as you see it now, based on the historical significance and definition of the American dream, and then to critique it, right? Is it possible? Have we ever seen it come into place? Here in American Lit 2, right, in modern American literature, we see that our authors don't even necessarily believe in the American dream. Instead, they're sort of watching the slow burn that it's undergoing, right, as it sort of falls away from that unrealistic ideal, right? So you will be able to use some self-reflection, right? If you have an example that supports a claim that you're making from one of the authors, then you should feel comfortable using yourself as an example there. I would also like for you to maybe meditate on or explore how we could in turn renew the American dream from where it currently has, from where you currently see it, right? How can we uplift that American community? How can we uplift that consciousness? Is it even possible, right? And I think that this is a really interesting essay, especially for right now, because we could argue, that we are living in a dystopic America, where we're being told not to congregate. Right? That's what social distancing is. We can't gather into groups of 10 or more. We're being told to pause, essentially, right? And that in itself is not inherently American, right? Americans believe in always sort of charging forward of the value of work, and the value that the individual can have on their community. Well, what do we do now while the individual is being while the individual is having to succumb to forced isolation, right? Again, this is this is a pretty, sort of depressive and dark essay that I'm asking you to write. I guess like the only glimmer of hope could really come in, how do you see this being able to be changed, right? Or how do you see us hoping to renew that dream that we once had, right? I decided to be nice because we are now doing solely online course. And so instead of normally for our second essay, I will have you guys write a 7 to 10 page research paper. However, I'm, late in getting the prompt to you anyway, but we're also having to already deal with so many different environmental factors that it just needs to be a 6 to 8 page in correct MLA format. And needs to have a 4 source minimum. Okay. Of those 4 sources, one of them needs to come from the critical scholarly source from the journal project, right? I wanted to remind you of where you can locate those resources. So here under journal project, we click there, we see that we have our Modern American Literature Free Writing Journal, and we have all of the prompts that were assigned in relation to that. And then under here, we have our scholarly project, right? So this is sort of an amalgamation of scholarship that I've been collecting as I've been teaching this class. And so I've been uploading these essays that I want you to be interacting with, and I want you to also use one of them as one of your sources, right? I do want you to do some outside research for this project, so you can use max of 2, right? And I'm totally fine with that, but one of them needs to come from this project that we've been developing. Lastly, and focusing on a minimum of 3 authors from this class, okay? And ideally, I would like to see one author from the beginning of the course. We touched on Emerson, so we'll begin with Emerson as being an option. One author from the beginning of the class, and then one from mid-class, right? So right about where we are now, where we started with Frost, Hughes, Hurston. Oh, who did we lecture on before that? Images Poetry, right? So Wallace Stevens, William Carlos Williams. All of those are appropriate authors to use for the mid. And then lastly, ideally, I'd like it to come from the latter half of the class, right? So probably as current as we'll get. So Adrienne Rich, John Berryman. We even get so current as to look at Natasha Trethewey, Toni Morrison's Recidify. These are all going to be really valuable options to you for this assignment. Okay. So that's option A, right? Or option 1, whatever you want to call it. And now we have option 2 or option B, right? Art as redeemer. So it's, we're looking to reacquaint ourselves with the power that art and literature can have over our perspective, right? The role and acceptance of literary art in our times. The past isn't over. It's not even past. William Faulkner. And then the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. And that's a quote from Martin Luther King. Again, I love epigraphs, right? So that's why my prompts are always riddled with them. In William Faulkner's Requiem for a Nun, he wrote, "The past isn't over, it's not even past. Time in human history may march forward in a singular line, but the human mind is anything but linear in its development, and this is so far the whole of society. Our achievements and faults come in fits and cycles, and the glories cannot be parted from the sins. American art and literature is filled with the examinations of these relationships through major events that define a moment for the people who live every day under the consciousness of history. American essayist Anais Nin wrote in her novel, The Novel of the Future, it's the function of art to renew our perception. What we are familiar with, we cease to see. The writer shakes up the familiar scene, and is as if by magic, we see a new meaning in it. Similar to the responsibilities outlined by Emerson in his essay, The Poet, he writes, this insight, which expresses itself by what is called imagination, is a very high sort of seeing, which does not come by study, but by the intellect being where and what it sees, by sharing the path or circuit of things through forms, and so making them translucid to others. The path of things is silent. Will they suffer a speaker to go with them? A spy they will never suffer. A lover, a poet, is the transcendency of their own nature. Him they will suffer. The condition of true naming on the poet's part is his resigning himself to the divine aura which breathes through forms and accompanying that. The question we must ask, what is the nature of this meaning? When art has revealed new layers of ideas, what do these ideas tell us about the person, their cultural context, and their subject matter? You should use 4 texts to demonstrate the change over time in the relationship through art between the society accepted people and those on the outside of the acceptance, as seen in the texts in the class. The difference could be represented through differences in class, race, gender, or any combination, since one cannot isolate one aspect of the self from the whole, and the texts need to be contemporary to each other and to ensure that they are part of the same cultural period. Using your knowledge of this change over time, you should make an argument of whether there was progress in the relationship between these groups and whether the text indicated change. Lastly, you should leave room to examine how this artistic and or literary period may have impacted the American present-day consciousness and community. Define this renewal using the works and theoretical approaches touched on in the course, or show us the future we may now be fated to inherit. This section may require you to reflect on your own disillusionment or isolation from the dominant American hegemony, or explore how you personally have found hope still from the shared experience from the writers before your time. And it's the same requirement as the essay before, right? 6 to 8 pages, 4 source minimum works cited page, 1 source from the critical scholarly source from the journal project, focusing on a minimum of 4 authors from this class, right? So I wanted to present you with 2 options. Again, this is not you are not required to write 2 papers. You just choose from option 1 and option 2 and decide what best, I don't know, fits your soul, I guess, right? Um, I'm looking forward to reading these. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to email me. I'm always available. And yeah, happy reading and happy writing. Bye.